everyone. It's so lovely to see you all here today. My name's Ruth Wallace. I'm the Director of the Northern Institute. And it's a real honour to host Stephen today. I think his work is of great importance and a real direction that the university can be growing in. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Larrakia people, and know that they are always in our thoughts as we develop research in this space. Stephen is a lecturer in sociology at Charles Darwin University, and for 25 years he's been an advocate for social change, particularly in regard to those people that live on the gender margins of society. And this has included being an active member of the queer communities both nationally and locally in Newcastle and in Darwin. He's also volunteered as a telephone crisis counsellor for Lifeline. In 2015, Dr. Kerry was invited to be a keynote speaker at the Variant Sex and Gender, Religion and Wellbeing Conference in the United Kingdom, and has since moved to Darwin to begin research into the health needs of transgender and sex gender diverse people living in the Northern Territory. I know that you completed your PhD in the social lives of intersex Australians, and recent research has been about the role of religion in the lives of intersex Australians, and this has garnered international attention. We're really looking forward to hearing your presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks to the Northern Institute for allowing me to speak today. I also would like to acknowledge the elders and traditional owners, past and present, of the Larrakia Nation on whose land I stand today. I come to this research as an outsider, not only to Darwin and the Northern Territory, but also because my research includes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. I am a second-generation Australian, born to English migrants. As English, my parents were preferred choices in the 1960s. Therefore, I am a direct result of inherently racist policies. I begin here because my research, indeed all social research, is framed by subjectivities. My identity, my background, my sense of self have determined the topic of my study. I identify primarily as a genderqueer Buddhist, but my racial identity and its links to historical colonisation and contemporary forces of oppression can impact upon the research I am doing. The term genderqueer has only recently emerged and hasn't garnered much attention outside of queer circles. It has been adopted by many people because we no longer are satisfied with the limitations of gender binary. Some of us do not identify as men or women, nor are we transgender. I and many sex gender diverse people prefer to see ourselves outside of gender. This view of gender itself has been the cornerstone of transgender theory over the past 3 decades, and I'll come back to this later. As we've mentioned, I moved to Darwin in 2012 to take up this position, lecturer in sociology here at Charles Darwin University. Occasionally, in my conversations with local queers, after I mentioned what I do for a living, they would often ask me if I had heard of the Sistergirls. I hadn't. And as any good researcher would do or should do, I went looking in the literature about mention of Sistergirls. After all, wasn't I supposed to be an expert in sex gender diversity? I soon realised the reason I had never heard of Sistergirls is because the extant literature on transgenderism in Australia has never mentioned them. It was then I realised that the research rarely mentions transgender Aboriginal and Torres Strait people, and it rarely mentions people from the Northern Territory. It became clear that whether I was going to be in Darwin for 5 months or 5 years, I should at least try to help the community. I have a very unique set of skills and I wanted to make them available to the community. I first set out to do a review of the literature. The academic and government-funded research on transgender stretches back to the early 1970s. This literature review resulted in an overview of the key issues facing transgender Australians over the past decades. More specifically, it provided a critical view into discrimination, as well as the health needs of transgender, sex gender diverse people over the past decade. In this research review, I concluded that there are 4 primary themes throughout this research. These include economic instability, social exclusion, poor health, and abuse. In 2014, I published this literature review in the International Journal Transgenderism. So before I go into my current research project, I wanted to revisit some of the issues that I identified in the literature, because I want to use this as a basis of our better understanding of transgender issues in the Northern Territory, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are transgender. So the first issue I identified in the literature was economic instability. Many transgender people are unemployed. They are unemployed because they have transitioned. Despite there being anti-discrimination laws throughout most of Australia, losing one's job because of being transgender remains a reality. In 2012, the National Private Lives 2 project reported that 15% of transgender men, 16% of transgender women, and 19% of a group designated as other, those people who, like myself, identify as genderqueer, were not in paid employment. What is significant about these numbers is they are significantly higher than other queers. For example, gay, bisexual cis men and lesbian, bisexual cis women, were 6% and 8% not in paid employment, respectively. Moreover, 30% of transgender men, 33% of transgender women, and 25% of other were in full-time employment. This is significantly less than the 52% of gay, bisexual cis men and the 40% of lesbian, bisexual cis women. For those who are unaware of this term cis men and cis women and cisgender, I want to briefly give you a little bit of introduction of what these terms mean, because they will be coming up again. Cis men refers to those people who were raised boys and now identify as men. Similarly, the term cis women refers to those people who were raised as girls and now identify as adults as women, what we will call normal. This includes straight and gay men and women. It's not about gender identity. It's distinguishing between gender identity and sexuality, making sure that when we talk about gender, transgender, sex gender diversity, we are making a distinction between those who are normal. Inverted commas. In addition to unemployment, the literature refers to economic instability as housing. Transgender Australians are more likely than the general population to be in the rental market and less likely to be able to afford purchasing their own homes. There are also problems with unstable housing in terms of being in short-term accommodation and being homeless. These two issues of unemployment and housing, proved under economic instability, has a direct impact upon transgender people who wish to undergo medically assisted gender reassignment, namely hormone therapy and sex reassignment surgery. For many transgender people, medically assisted gender reassignment is financially out of their reach, even when they have been given the go-ahead by doctors and psychiatrists. The second issue that I identified in the literature is social isolation. This includes several factors such as being single, living alone, or estrangement from family. Many transgender Australians struggle to find and maintain intimate relationships. In some research projects, significant numbers of participants had never been in a relationship. In one of the early research projects conducted in 1994, called the Transgender Lifestyles and HIV Risk Project, had identified that there was a predominance of casual sexual encounters. They stated that there is a level of casualness or perhaps promiscuity, especially in the 1990s. There also appears to be a significant number of transgender people who live alone. For the purpose of the project, I exclude people who live with pets. People who live with pets also. So, trust me, as a person who lives with cats, I don't like saying that, but for the purpose of this, let's talk about the moment with humans. So it's not a stretch of the imagination to acknowledge that the family is highly valued in Australian society. You can't turn on the TV at the moment without seeing the media and political campaigns placing considerable emphasis on the family. Even within queer discourses of the last 15 years, debates around same-sex marriage, or so-called same-sex marriage, emphasises the family, and the families gain considerable significance. Yet for many queer people and for many transgender people, they are estranged from their families because they are queer, because they are transgender. And being ostracised from one's family can be very traumatic, even for those of us who are the bravest and most courageous. I myself didn't speak to my father for the last 7 years of his life. He died in May, and I haven't spoken to my mother in 3 years. Well, I'm a 45-year-old person, and this still upsets me. It's not surprising when we're taking into consideration these two previous themes that transgender Australians experience poor health. Research conducted more recently over the past decade have revealed that not only do transgender Australians experience poorer health than the general population, but also poorer health than compared to other queer people. In all measures of health, I want to emphasise that, in all measures of health and well-being, transgender people do far worse than their cisgender peers. When we look more specifically at mental illness, transgender people experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation than their gay and lesbian peers. Additionally, transgender Australians also engage in more risk behaviours such as alcohol and drug abuse, as well as having higher rates of sexually transmitted infections. The final theme I identified in the research is the prevalence of abuse. This is more than discrimination. These are incidences of sexual assault and rape, verbal harassment in public and private, domestic violence, physical abuse, and murder. I wanted to reinforce these findings because these are acting as a baseline from which I want to compare the lived experiences of transgender people in the Northern Territory, as well as transgender Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. As I intend to claim, these populations experience many of these same issues, but additionally they have some very unique issues which are directly related to living in the Northern Territory and being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. In 2014, I put together a pilot study. This was an online survey which was designed to gauge both the support of the community in doing a study, and I wanted to find out what was needed from the community to be studied. I am an outsider, came to Darwin as an outsider, and I knew that jumping straight into the community and asking them to talk to me would perhaps be difficult. So I wanted to use this online survey as a first step to letting people to know who I am and getting to know what were the issues that the community wanted me to focus on. I certainly didn't want to walk in and go, well, this is what I'm interested in researching, I'm going to do this. I really want to take my cues from the community. Sorry. So in a period of 12 months, the survey attracted 13 participants who completed the survey. And as a pilot study focusing on qualitative rather than quantitative research methods, I considered this quite successful. From these results, I determined that health needs of transgender people are a priority. Last year, I began advertising for participants to interview. In May, I sent out messages to local and national organisations such as Rainbow Territory, Sisters and Brothers NT, and the Gender Centre in Sydney, to name a few. At the same time, in coordination with the university, I put out a media release about my research, and this attracted considerable local, national and international media attention, I was contacted by a newspaper in the United Kingdom about this research. In addition to the 13 people who participated, I have now interviewed 11, and I've lined up a few more interviews to take place in the next few months. Some of which are directly related to my recent trip to Alice Springs to be part of their Pride Carnival Festival. While some of the people who participated in the online survey were also interviewed, the online survey was anonymous, so I don't know for a fact that they are the same people, but I can make an educated guess. So putting that aside, I'm assuming that they aren't the same people and that so far I've interviewed and participated in with 24 people. I'm pleased to say this is a very diverse group of people. There are people from across the territory, including the more populated areas of the territory such as Darwin and Alice Springs, as well as remote areas. This is due in part to the fact that the internet has allowed this very remote communities to access these sort of projects. Having said that, 2 people who responded to the online survey and 2 people I have interviewed no longer live in the territory. And I'll come back to this point later. The 24 participants have used a range of terms to describe their gender and transgender identities, and I've put most of them up on the slide here. This includes man-woman, trans man, sister-girl, brother-boy, trans-fabulous, cross-dresser, and genderqueer. These participants range in ages from 18 to their 60s, different races, Aboriginal, mixed race, Asian, Caucasian, as well as socio-economic features. Some people are unemployed, some people are students, some people are retired, some people in full-time employment. I took this range of characteristics as a good sign. I consider that this sample is neither representative of the population, nor is it statistically significant. But thankfully, when you're using qualitative research methods, that doesn't matter. For those of you who probably expect qualitative, quantitative research, you may be a bit disappointed because that doesn't happen. The reason that doesn't happen is because I take my emphasis through my training, my research background, in 4 theoretical disciplines. And I mention these 4, postmodernism, feminism, queer theory, and transgender theory specifically because they've given me something in terms of how I approach my research. These disciplines, in various ways, highlight the problems associated with outsiders doing research on social groups that they do not belong to. Social groups that are socially disadvantaged and marginalised. Social research such as history, anthropology and sociology have been predominantly dominated by a white, middle-class, Western, straight, cis man conducting research on the other. In doing so, they produce work which is at the very least skewed by this subjectivity. And invariably their own subjectivity as white, middle class, Western, straight, cis men often goes uncriticised or unchallenged by themselves. The fact that postmodernism, feminism, queer theory and transgender theory all underline the subjectivities of the researcher, bringing it forward into the research, these disciplines set up an unprecedented self-reflective analysis. What this does is help us understand any imbalances of power inherent to the research of other. I say this with all humility because I have power in the research that I do. I belong to a university, it has power. The fact that I'm referred to as doctor has power. And I can't do anything to undermine that other than acknowledge it. I'm off script here, but some participants refer to me as Dr. Stephen. So I cringe when I hear that because I'd rather just be seen as Stephen, but I have to acknowledge that that is the power that goes with who I am and what I do. And that will impact upon the research I do and who or who will not speak with me. Another feature of postmodernism, feminism, queer theory and transgender theory is the emphasis on voice of the marginalised peoples. Indian post-colonial theorist Spivak belongs to the tradition of writing history from below, letting the subaltern speak. The subaltern in this case being the colonised people, colonised not just in terms of race, but also in terms of sexuality and gender. Thinking about how sexuality and gender and Western concepts have been dominated by a white man for the last 200 years. What I do then is interpret my research in very specific ways, certainly in terms of this notion of qualitative versus quantitative. What is important to me is that the individual's perspective is not swallowed up by numbers. There is a fondness in our society for averages, means, standard deviations, statistical significance, and this is certainly not the framework I come to. I'm often asked in my interactions with other people in mainstream society about, well, how many transgender people are there in the Northern Territory? My reaction is that's the wrong question to ask. Why are we focused so much on a number? In some way they're saying, well, if it reaches a certain critical mass of a number, then I'll take an interest in the research. So I think whether it's 2 people or 2,000 people, it's all about what are the issues being pulled up. So I give value to the 24 people who have enabled me to claim a broad base of narratives from different perspectives. And hopefully we can achieve a glimpse into the ways in which transgender people in the Northern Territory live from them. As I mentioned, the health needs of transgender Territorians is a priority. At the outset, it should be emphasised that when we speak of health needs, this should not be shorthanded into gender reassignment. This is also a common misconception in popular culture or mainstream societies that when transgender people are talking about their health needs, they're talking about accessing sexual reassignment surgery or hormones. This is not necessarily the case. Of course, several participants have accessed medically assisted gender reassignment and others do desire it, but some others do not. For some participants, their concerns with access to medical care is about general medical care. What participants have indicated is that medical services are often difficult to access, and this is not just for those who live out bush, as one participant described it, but healthcare in Darwin and Alice Springs can also be difficult to access. Several participants also spoke of medical professionals who do not possess knowledge of transgender issues or who are not trans-friendly. Frustratingly, transgender people feel as though they have to educate the medical staff before they can just get their basic medical care. What is often being taught by participants is that sometimes the doctors have a unnecessary curiosity that needs to be fed first before they can get medical care. Somehow the doctors feel as though they need to have all their questions answered by this representative of the entire community before they can do their job. There's a lot of frustration associated with someone presenting to for medical care and then feels that they have to do their advocacy or education work first before they can get basic medical care. Additionally, medical staff may only be in the Northern Territory temporarily. The phrase fly in, fly out is often associated with the mining industry, but is also applicable to the medical profession. Many healthcare professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, counsellors, come north to do a short-term placement and then leave. For many transgender people, they feel that they have to regularly repeat their story as a result of this high turnover. This is significant when accessing psychiatrists because a person requires a psychiatrist's recommendation before they can access medically assisted gender reassignment. But more broadly, receiving general mental health care is essential considering that transgender people experience higher than average levels of depression, anxiety and suicidal ideation. Researchers in South Australia, Damien Riggs and his colleagues, surveyed 188 transgender people across Australia. And they found that while some medical professionals are doing well in servicing the healthcare needs of gender diverse clients, Other professionals have fallen short of adequately meeting these needs. A similar project conducted in the UK over a period of 15 years interviewed 183 transgender people. They concluded that 21% of that sample reported that their medical practitioner did not want to help, and 6% actually refused to help. This challenges this notion that the doctors are there to help patients, that they're there to help the community. Many doctors bring in their own personal prejudices to their medical practice, which goes against our perception of doctors being open-minded and caring. In the UK researchers' point of view, the doctor's attitude still presents a considerable barrier. Again, these are numbers. People do like numbers. I occasionally get a chance to use them. But we don't know numbers like that here in the Torres territory, but it seems to be consistent with research done elsewhere in Australia and internationally. I'm labouring this point about medical practitioners because I originally wanted to speak with medical practitioners in the Northern Territory. I wanted to talk to people who've had clients who are transgender, and in order to gauge their point of view, their perspective, what were their issues in providing healthcare. I was contacted by 5 people who were interested in talking to me officially in terms of interviews. And in those preliminary conversations, they spoke of not having many resources from which they could draw from and a sense of professional isolation. They didn't know who they could turn to and ask for assistance when their own knowledge was lacking. So I made an informal attempt to bring them all together, to maybe they can be in contact with each other, support each other. However, over a course of just a short months, I was getting no response from my queries. Maybe they too all fly in, fly out. Recently in Darwin, a doctor is flown up from down south to provide a clinic for the LGBTIQA community. When the first clinic was run, a doctor held an information session about transgender issues and was attended by many people who were service providers, community members and researchers. A session was run also with a second clinic. However, ironically, I was sick and I had to attend that day. But this clinic shows that there is some attempts to bring these issues forward in terms of providing healthcare. Having said that, being able to access healthcare is a push factor for almost all people I have spoken to. All except for one person spoke of leaving the NT. And I'll repeat that, all but one person spoke of leaving the NT. And the exception had just recently returned to the NT 5 or so years ago. Since speaking with me, many of those people have actually left. And 2 people who completed the online survey and 2 people who I interviewed no longer live in the territory. What I'm concluding is that there appears to be a choice that needs to be made. Either stay in the territory and thereby continue to deny their true gender identity, or give up their home, community, family in order to affirm their gender identity. One participant, Oliver, that's a pseudonym that's been applied to him, who identifies as a cross-dresser, decided that he was unable to leave the NT because the cost was too high. So he's decided to stay in the territory, even though this means he can only live in his preferred gender, Olivia, part-time in the privacy of his own home. Another push factor for people living in the NT is social isolation. This issue emerges in several ways, such as establishing intimate relationships, estrangement from family, and knowing other transgender people. Star Lady is a strong advocate for transgender people in the territory, especially Sistergirls and brotherboys. In addition to speaking with me, she also speaks quite openly about how she has found it hard to meet cis men who are willing to date her openly. She and a few other participants speak of how some cis men have no problem dating or sleeping with transgender women, but they do not want to date transgender women openly. They don't want others, in particular their mates, knowing that they are sleeping with a transgender woman for fear of being perceived as gay. This reflects a wider, persistent and very transphobic misconception that transgender women are really men. For several transgender people I've spoken to, their relationships with family have been impacted upon by their transition. And this also includes partners. More recently, the topic of transgender has garnered considerable public attention, and many younger people are finding it relatively easier to access information and support when it comes to transitioning. The Safe Schools program, for example, offers a key level of support for young people coming to terms with their sex gender diversity. However, some transgender Territorians transition later in life. The literature is replete with narratives which state that for many transgender women, they spend a great deal of time denying their gender identity. For decades, they attempt to pass as men and engage in hypermasculine activities in order to hide their desire to live as women. Passing is in equal measure an attempt to deny their true identity to others and to themselves. Some of these hypermasculine activities include joining armed forces or the police, taking part in sports, getting married and having children, as well as heavy drinking and drug taking. 2 participants were married at the time of being interviewed, and they were both in the process of negotiating their transition with their wives. Since being interviewed, one of them has sent me regular updates indicating that their relationship has been very difficult. This is also complicated by the fact that in the Northern Territory, like other jurisdictions in Australia, people have to get a divorce before they're eligible for many aspects of transitioning. These are the couples who are often ignored in current debates around same-sex marriage. Difficulties with families more generally are also prominent, of course. Some transgender people have been ostracised from their family. They struggle to come out to their parents and their siblings. Some transgender people, including some who have good support from friends, talk about not knowing anyone else who is transgender. I interviewed 2 students here at Charles Darwin University who didn't know each other. Another who lives in Alice Springs spoke of how they rely on the internet to maintain friendships with transgender people in Adelaide and Melbourne, and she only manages to visit them once every 2 to 3 years. Having the support of friends and family is one thing, and that's a good thing when they do have it. But without other transgender people to talk to and share what it is to transition, there is something often unnoticed or untangible missing in their lives, and this is how they describe it. And I suggest that this is a sense of community. While there is an advocacy group in the Northern Territory, Sisters and Brothers NT, is not only based in Alice Springs, but also 3 of the vocal members have left the Northern Territory. In the online survey, several transgender men mentioned that they had an informal social group here in Darwin, where they get together in each other's houses. So a second conclusion I make from my research so far is social exclusion. Problems with accessing healthcare and social exclusion are 2 issues affecting all participants in some manner, and this included the transgender Aboriginal and Torres Islander people. However, transgender Aboriginal and Torres Islander people, also referred to as Sistergirls and brotherboys, do experience several unique problems. These include racism within the predominantly white transgender community and transphobia within traditional communities. There remains a very public perception that even if queer Indigenous people exist now, that they didn't exist prior to colonisation. And this dominant perception exists both in Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities alike. For example, in 2013, following the airing on an episode of Redfern Now, which depicted an interracial gay couple, Anthony Mundine infamously tweeted, "Watching Redfern now and they promoting homosexuality, like it's okay in our culture. That ain't in our culture, and our ancestors would have their head for it. Like my dad told me, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve." I've corrected for spelling mistakes. As an academic, you can't help but correct for spelling mistakes. In Dina Hodges' edited collection, oh sorry, I did have that out. There it is. Available at Darwin Bookshop. Tony Anthony Bayliss writes, the sexual and gender diversity of Aboriginal peoples remains mostly absent in recordings and interpretation of Australian histories. And these absences reinforce a heterocentric reading of Aboriginal cultures. What he's saying here is that there is an invisibility associated with anything to do with queerness in Aboriginal cultures. For most people, when they see representations of Aboriginal people in the media, it's usually in terms of negative aspects, certainly in terms of the criminal justice system. The term sister girl, according to Crucia Brown, who isn't from the Northern Territory, but she does speak of this, I want to use her quote. She says that it is a self-adopted term, recognising that Western definitions of transgender do not reflect the culture and lived reality of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander transgender people. The term sister girl is also used in many Indigenous communities in northern parts of Australia to refer to transgender people and to also replace derogatory terms that were used in the past. Terms such as sister girl and brother boy have been adopted by many people in the communities to shift their attention away from a lot of the negativity associated in traditional communities, but also to establish a difference with the term transgender. Brianna Curtis says that sister girls have always been part of traditional cultures and they will join women to do traditional women's duties. She and Crystal Johnson state that many Indigenous languages have unique terms for sister girls. Crystal also says that the term sister girl came out of the stolen generations. However, just because terms exist doesn't necessarily mean that sister girls are accepted. In her contribution to Dina Hodges' Colouring the Rainbow, Crystal says that the larger Manu people in central western Northern Territory and some of their neighbours, the Wilpiri people, kill sister girls. Crystal Johnson is a very prominent member in the sister girl community on the Tiwi Islands and in the Northern Territory more generally. For over 10 years, she's been active in bringing attention to issues facing sister girls and brother boys in the NT. In 2012, she was the first sister girl elected to public office. Crystal has also been very open about her story. And I want to pause to give due respect to her story and the pain that she lives every day. Crystal has been raped and gang raped. Her brother was raped and he eventually took his own life. Another brother was bashed and her mother was constantly harassed. Her mother eventually slit her own throat in front of Crystal on Crystal's birthday. Growing up, Crystal was not accepted by her community. She was forced to participate in men's business. And the violence inflicted upon her family, was payback for her being a sister girl. Crystal tells me that the white culture doesn't understand payback. Within traditional cultures, it is the family, not just the individual, who pays for the individual's digression from traditional culture. When Crystal was telling me her story, she was in tears, but she kept telling me her story. She wants her story to be told. She also talked to me about human rights, and she has come to the realisation that sister girls don't have human rights. Even now, despite the support sister girls receive in their community in the Tiwi Islands, a sister girl committed suicide just a few weeks ago, at the same time that we were in Alice Springs for Pride Carnival. Suicide is a huge issue for sister girls and brother boys, which is exacerbated by many of the issues that I've already discussed today. More positively, Crystal speaks of having achieved respect. She has respect as an advocate for Sistergirls. She has respect as a local government councillor and has respect as part of her traditional community. She tells Dina Hollis, that one of her brothers, an elder who died recently in 2013, apologised. She writes, "He respected me like an elder and he gave me his blessings. It was good. He turned around and handed me his kids and the honour of being an elder. That's a title I keep." Crystal is elder and she is auntie. Another sister girl I've spoken to, Brianna, who identifies with several nations surrounding Alice Springs, currently lives in Sydney, as does her twin sister Rosalina. They both moved to Sydney to access hormone therapy, yet they return to Alice Springs often, such as recently with Alice Springs Pride Carnival. Brianna's relationship with her family is very different to Crystal. Her family said that she did not have to go through men's ceremony. Sorry, her father said that she did not have to go through men's ceremony. Despite the dominance of Christianity and the negative influence that Christianity has had on traditional cultures and Sistergirls and brotherboys in particular, Brianna says that her mother's side, which is the Christian side, has been more supportive than her father's side, which is the atheist side. This is what I'm going to end my presentation today. My research is still ongoing and I've still a lot to discover. I still have a few more interviews to do in the next couple of weeks, and I'm still open to interview people and still going to be open for some time. But for now, I'd like to take away three main ideas. Firstly, transgender people in the Northern Territory do share some of the issues that are facing transgender people across Australia. Second, there are several unique problems directly associated with living in the Territory, such as difficulty accessing appropriate healthcare and social isolation, both of which are push factors for many transgender Territorians. Finally, in addition to these issues, Sistergirls and brotherboys are also balancing their needs with the needs of the community. For Sistergirls and brotherboys, payback and suicide remain largely invisible to outsiders. Thank you.